I've just emailed Stella in case she's...
That's quite a game getting into here, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, no, because Mary sent me a link. That worked, so I didn't have to go through all that. She obviously realised I wouldn't be able to cope with it.
Yeah, no, it took me about 3 days. Look at that. I'm trying to remember how many people were on that list. There were quite a few, weren't there? But not many of them here.
The people are filtering in, Chris. Have the faith.
Yes, yes, no, that's right. They're struggling with what I just struggled with, and that's quite understandable.
There we go. There's Stella. Perfect.
Good.
Excellent. Once she's on, which I think she is. Hi, Stella.
Oh, yes.
Hello.
Well, lots of
Great.
people. Right.
Great to have you here. Wonderful. So I think we should get started because we're about 5 minutes behind time a little bit now. So hello, everyone. Again, I don't know if you were here this morning, but my name is Celicia, and I am with BirdLife International working on vulture conservation across Africa. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to the Vulture Safe Zone Roundtable discussion, where we'll have Dr. Don Mallard from RSPB, who's the Chief Conservation Scientist there, sharing with us some words about VSZs, what they are, and what's been happening in Asia. And then we have Dr. Stella Egbe from Nigeria Conservation Foundation, who's going to share with us an overview of vulture safe zones in Africa. And then we're going to go into hopefully a very lively discussion about vulture safe zones and Egyptian vultures and what may or may not work and what have people tried. So that's basically the structure. So I'll hand it over to Dr. John Mallard.
Thanks very much, Celicia. So given the increasing interest that there is in vulture safe zones around the world, I think it's worth just reminding ourselves of how the concept originated and how it is defined in Asia. And I bow to the greater knowledge of 2 people at least on this call, Jamshed from Pakistan and Chris, the font of all knowledge when it comes to vultures. So a vulture safe zone was originally envisaged as an area of 30,000 square kilometers. And that's not an arbitrary figure. It was believed to represent the normal home range of an adult white-rumped vulture, and that was based on satellite tracking that had been done in Pakistan. And this area is centered on an extant breeding colony, or in the case of the similar vulture release zones, a site earmarked for the future release of vultures from the captive breeding population. And the importance of the size of this area is twofold. Firstly, it needs to be large enough so that it actually represents an area that is relevant to vultures. Indeed, it's important to note that a vulture safe zone is supposed to fulfill all the needs of a vulture population. Breeding and roosting sites, for instance, and especially important in the Asian context, a safe food supply. Secondly, however, the area also needs to be small enough, compact enough, so that conservation actions that are undertaken can be focused, really focused into an important area, so that it increases the chances of those actions actually having an impact on the target vulture populations. Now, due to the unique circumstances surrounding the decline of vultures in South Asia, the main aim of vulture safe zone work in Asia has been to remove the veterinary use of diclofenac. And this has largely been through advocacy and education. Now, firstly, this was with governments, and this led to the drug being banned throughout South Asia, which was perhaps the single most important conservation action. Secondly, though, local conservation teams continue to work with pharmacists, vets and livestock owners to ensure that there is no illegal use of human formulations of diclofenac, which are still legally sold in pharmacies because it's a legal drug for human use. Now, this approach can be modified depending on the circumstances. So, for instance, in Bangladesh, where diclofenac was eliminated several years ago, the big problem there was the use of another toxic NSAID, ketoprofen. But through a similar program of advocacy and education, our partners there, IUCN Bangladesh, have managed to get the government to implement a nationwide ban on that drug too. So it should be stressed that this is a very piecemeal approach. You know, the teams are effectively working from pharmacy to pharmacy, town to town. So for instance, in Nepal, the first steps that our partner, Bird Conservation Nepal, took was to create diclofenac-free districts. And now the success of those, when they got a district that was genuinely diclofenac-free, they would have a little ceremony with the local communities, etc., and celebrate the fact that they had achieved that. But it wasn't until, firstly, all the districts within a vulture safe zone were actually free of diclofenac. And then secondly, the area was proved safe by monitoring of vultures and their survival and population increases, was the vulture safe zone declared truly safe. So that's kind of all I really want to say about that. Others can come in if there's things they feel I've missed, but I don't want to hog the limelight.
Thank you so much for that, John. And we'll have plenty of time to get into the nitty-gritty. But I'd like to invite Stella to please share with us an overview of how we've adapted that concept here in Africa. Stella? You having trouble with your mic? Sorry, Stella, we can't hear you. Maybe if you reconnected or there we just heard you clear your throat.
Okay,
Hello.
so is it better now? Okay,
yes, that's perfect.
great. Okay, so thank you very much, Salisha, and thank you, John, for that preamble. So the vulture safe zone, and John has shared a very an overview basically. And in Africa, it's been more successful in Southern Africa, where private farm owners with farms sizes the range for vultures are being protected, and people are working with local farmers to look at vulture needs in these areas. And one of the major things to consider is how effective conservation efforts would be over these sizes of areas. Now, for vulture safe zone, now moving to West Africa, where we're trying to make attempts at the vulture safe zone efforts, it would be a little different. And this is one big thing to consider for local efforts in terms of implementing vulture safe zones. So for areas that have been identified, for example, in Nigeria, these are areas that are basically community forest, and the local efforts would differ compared to where you have private farms, like in Southern Africa. So for vulture safe zones to be effective, we must look at what the local challenges are, and what are these areas that have been identified, what are the measures that we want to implement in these areas. So this is how it differs from place to place. I'm really sorry, I have a newborn that is trying to contribute to the conversation. But so this is how these approaches will differ from area to area. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Stella, and we appreciate every contribution here from us because we need it all, right? Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, both of you, for that overview. And now I kind of want to invite a discussion around, starting with sort of considering Egyptian vultures and their particular ecology and behavior. Is the vulture safe zone approach applicable to Egyptian vultures? Who would like to share any thoughts? Thanks, Mary. The question is also in the chat in case you missed it. We have complete silence.
Hello, guys. I can say something.
Yes, welcome. Welcome.
Nice to be here. Hello to everybody. So how about trying to make some rubbish dumps safe for the vultures, because they gather high congregations anyway. So make sure that there is no poisoning of feral dogs going on, so no mass accidents of mass mortality can happen, as this happened in Northern Macedonia 30 years ago almost. So this is one idea.
Yeah, thank you. Jamshed?
Thank you, Salisha. I think the approach of vulture safe zones is very important for Egyptian vultures as well, because we in Pakistan are working in safe zones since 2012, when this concept was originated first time. We are working with SAVE, Chris knows about it. And I think this practice is very useful and helpful because we have established one vulture safe zone. And in that vulture safe zone, it's in the south portion of the Pakistan in district Thar Parker, and we are working with communities, with farmers, with the veterinary practitioners, pharmacists, school children, and also monitoring vulture populations. And especially when we talk about Egyptian vultures in this context, so during discussions in previous presentation, you might have noticed that the wintering population of Egyptian vultures from Uzbekistan, they travel through Pakistan and then stay the winter in Indian side. So the portion where these birds stays in Pakistan area, so this is the vulture safe zone in Pakistan, in Nagar Parker area. So in that area, we have a breeding population of Egyptian vulture as well. So I think in future, these sites need to be protected, and I think there is need to done much more for the conservation of these areas, especially when we talk about the vulture safe zone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jamshed. Anyone want to build on that? I mean, thinking about what I'm going to, mispronounce your name, Ivelo shared with us around, rubbish sites and dumps. What do you think are other sort of opportunities or challenges and drawbacks around vulture safe zones for the Egyptian vulture?
Was this question to me?
Well, if you have some thoughts,
Yeah.
you could definitely go ahead.
Yeah, municipalities are usually, when there is conflict with feral dogs, usually the municipalities are responsible for taking action. And unfortunately, what they do frequently is just poison all of the dogs. One of the places where they go is the rubbish dump, because it holds big number of feral dogs always. And this is the place where all of the Egyptian vouchers arose. But we are not sitting all the time on the rubbish dumps, and we miss almost all of the cases. It was just by chance that 30 years ago, our colleague Bratislav Grubac from Northern Macedonia was there to witness that 60 Egyptian vouchers were poisoned in one day during such campaign. So we need to work with municipalities, I think, and with NGOs that are working for the better treatment of feral dogs. This is the only way forward, and I think it is a better possibility compared with the total with the people who poisoned wolves and jackals, because there you have thousands of farmers and it's so hard to work with them. Well, here we have one single municipality for every rubbish dump, and maybe one dog protection NGO.
Yeah, thank you so much. Stella and then Mohammed. So Stella, go ahead.
Okay, so for us in Nigeria, where the Egyptian vulture spends just part of its life, and we've noticed that over time, even recording viable populations of those migratory groups has been very difficult. So it's not so easy to say this is what is exactly going to work in terms of vulture safe zones. However, what we are trying to do is apply this for other species while we carry out monitoring and research, and if we're able to find areas, new areas, because historical sites where these vultures are using, clearly they are no longer there, so they are using other areas, and if we can find those areas, we can then find out what is happening in those particular areas and how we can intervene for the Egyptian vulture particularly. So for what we're proposing in Nigeria currently, it is for the hooded vultures, but we are really hoping that this serves as a framework for the Egyptian vulture when we find viable populations in the areas where they currently utilize. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Stella. Go ahead, Mohammed.
Thank you very much. Actually, we are going to start the issue of, to have a safe zone for the vulture in some royal protected areas. But actually, my question, I see several people have here an experience. If we want to identify or the definition of the vulture zone, what issues that we need to talk? Now, I see that some of the people look to the area should be large. And if the area will be large, okay, how large it is it, how we looked at, especially, we have a migratory species, it's a large country that we have. And second things, it's one of the question, how is effective will be this large area, that if we select it, and what also, should we look only about the poisoning? We know the poisoning is a problem, electrocution and collation is a problem. So how we can, define all of these, because now all what we talk is about the, looking to the poisoning more than other issues. So if we want to define have a definition for the safe vulture zone, so how we can apply it here, so we can look to the, if we have an area, okay, one we finish from the like the diclofenac, there is some things to do in that part. What is the, if we select the large area, okay, how is effective and how many restaurants that we need, because these vultures are really move, you probably put one or two. So what is reliable, what you call it? It's the minimum areas. So I think it will be good, from people who have these kind of experiences to discuss this kind of issue. So, people will be clear, to go from one step to another and see what is the target people to approach. What is the, from the stakeholders that we needed to contact for each issue. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mohammed. And I see Chris has his mic off and probably one of the best people to start also answering these questions. So over to you, Chris.
Well, thank you. And thank you very much, Mohammed, for that, because I just want to try to build on exactly what you said about identifying the threats that are really relevant to your area is absolutely key. And in the case of the Asian vulture safe zones, we started very much, as John said, focusing on NSAIDs, diclofenac very specifically, but now we're trying to build in poison baits and other threats to the activities in vulture safe zones. So sort of coming from the other way around, I suppose, to make them effective. But I think also, as John said, but to reinforce that, that again, when we had the original concept, it was just trying to do something on a scale where people could get involved, because we found that, you know, for NSAID threat, really the main thing we needed to do was at a national scale, but there was, you know, there was nothing much that people could do at a local scale to really engage and then send the right message to the national scale. So it was with that in mind as well, trying to do something on a local scale that could then prompt people to put pressure on a national scale for those drug bans in that case. But so again, that's just how it's evolved in Asia, which might be helpful when you're thinking about the specific threats for Egyptian vulture in your country. So, just a final point I wanted to make is that we call them vulture safe zones, but actually we've constantly sort of gone back and then clarified these are provisional vulture safe zones until we've really done enough to call them vulture safe zones. And we've declared one area in Nepal as a vulture safe zone, and it's not the 100-kilometer radius. It's a smaller area than that, but it's still a very big area, and that's been defined by survival of satellite tracked birds. But again, John has been working very hard with the Nepalese to ascertain that. But I think there is a danger of, when you straight away call it a vulture safe zone, of people saying, well, it's not a vulture safe zone, and you know, just because you've drawn a line on a map and doing something, and if your vultures are moving greater distances than the white-rumped vultures are in India, you know, which is already long distances, there is a risk of undermining the credibility just by calling it a vulture safe zone instead of a provisional vulture safe zone. But yeah, I'm going back to your point, Mohammed, on which threats you want to single out. And as Jamshed said, you know, when you've got populations that are migrating through, how do you define the areas? I think, well, one of the ways you can do that is by, if you've got enough tracked birds that you know where the birds are really going, but or you've got another way of following them. I don't know, I've probably opened more questions than answers there, but I hope that's helpful.
Thank you so much, Chris. I mean, and just to build on that, you know, these are the struggles that we faced also in Africa a lot, because the situations here are that we have multiple myriad cross-cutting threats, and also, as Chris shared, species that have really, really massive home ranges and forage both in community lands and in protected areas, and you know, what do you call vulture safe? So what we've been discussing, and I think it would be something that we want to share with everyone as we progress, is we've been talking about how do we set up guiding principles, you know, that these are the kind of things that you need to consider when you're trying to establish a provisional vulture safe zone. around the threats that you're going to mitigate, the size, is it around is it around a nesting site, a foraging site, a roosting area? Are the people around willing to commit to longer term conservation actions and things like that? So we are working on this together, sort of BirdLife Africa partners and Asia Save partners to come up with these guiding principles, which we hope will be useful, and sort of making sure that we also keep the brand equity, as Chris was saying, like about a vulture safe zone intact and build on it. So kind of speaking on that, and we've shifted a little bit. So if there are other experiences that people have from other vulture safe zone projects with these kind of local factors where you've altered the approach, I'd love to hear about that from anyone in the audience as to how what kind of things did you do to adapt the vulture safe zone approach when it wasn't working in the local context necessarily in the same way. Like, it's not that easy, in Southern Africa, even with private landowners, to get 30,000 square kilometers and patrol them, and because you have a lot of fragmented things. So we've done things slightly differently here. So it would be great to hear from others if there's more thoughts around how the approach has been adapted. Or if you've thought of key sites that are out there. Mr. R. Chris, I'm massacring names. I'm so sorry. Okay. Please go ahead.
Do you hear me? Okay. Okay. So yes. I'm working in the Forest Service of Ioannina, which is in Ypres region in northwest Greece, nearby the Albanian border, which is was until recently a very high important area for Egyptian vultures. With before a decade, we had more than 10 pairs here, a huge concentration according to that period. But 40 years before, it was the most common raptor in our area. Poison baits separated this population, and now we have only transborder population, which you saw in the presentation in the morning. Still, they are surviving in Albania. What I understand and how we apply this vulture safe zone is that because satellite telemetry of a pair of AOs, which is permanent in this transborder area, is the territory size is not so big. It's about 20 to 30 kilometers. So for a migratory species like Egyptian vulture, the safe these zones could be renamed, let's say, as a safe breeding safe zone, which is coupled with specific measurements like feeding place, anti-poison dog range area, mitigating several, having some measurements, for example, giving to some shepherds binoculars or fences, electric fences, all-Flandry fences for the wolf attacks, preventing the wolf attack, or making some specific anti-poisoning campaigns, which is confined in a smaller area and in a bigger area, like 100 to 200 kilometers wide, which is most, let's say, the concept was applied in India and Pakistan, and we try also to apply this for griffon vultures in Pindos mountain range, where we see that the range of griffons with satellite transmitters are the range specifically after breeding the pair and the juvenile is going 100 or 200 kilometers flying every day. So the concept is not so easy applicable there. But for Egyptian vulture, if we have the breeding safe area and the critical key migratory areas like Ivailo said, about big rubbish dumps or areas that they concentrate, communal roofs, etc., then we can be more specific and we can be more effective, I think. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Absolutely. I think it's really, as you said, important to have that connectivity between the sort of vulture population, but also threat reduction and looking at the actions that you can take within an area that could be potentially effective and make that area viable for, you know, vulture populations to survive.
Yeah, I would add, yeah, that it should be, let's say, species specific, this concept, to work well.
That's an interesting concept, species specific. Any other thoughts on that in terms of making it species specific and and just putting it out there as well, like, how do you secure these sites, right? It's one thing to say, okay, this area is you know, important for vultures, like these dump sites are important for vultures and Egyptian vultures, and we're being species specific. How do we go about securing those, and what are the thoughts around you know, the approaches that can be used, because dump sites are sometimes in the middle of the city, and like, how do you make them secure? How do you make that a vulture safe zone? So I see John has his hand up. So John.
Hi, yeah, I'm not going to refer to your last point, Alicia, about securing dumps. I just wanted, I suppose, make a comment about this, the size issue, and your mention about griffons, and that they have very large home ranges, and then you have Egyptian vultures that are long distance migrants, and so obviously cover intercontinental distances. I suppose if we take something like the griffon first, yes, you're right. Being species specific is going to be important, and I think this is going to be an even bigger problem when we move on to Africa, where you've got species traveling across half the continent. But if you have an understanding of the land use of well, the habitat use by these birds, and this perhaps highlights the importance of telemetry studies to gain an understanding. They won't use this area in a uniform way, just as white-rump vultures won't use the Indian or Nepali or Pakistani environment in a uniform way. There will be areas that are most important. So even if you're dealing with an area, you know, a circle of radius 200-300 kilometers, rather than the nice little sweet 100-kilometer circle that we started off in Asia with, within that, there'll be places to focus. There'll be places where you can see that are important to birds, and two, you can see that they are probably going to be the source of an important threat. And so it could well be something you'll need to deal with. And that, so I wouldn't be put off by the size. I mean, one of the issues of size, again, it'll happen in Africa, but it happens in Asia, is vultures will usually cross boundaries of different countries, and so that will create issues surrounding larger vulture safe zones, in that you will have to deal with your neighboring countries in a civil way to try and get things done. But I don't think that size is necessarily a barrier to doing the work. It's just focusing on in the important areas for vultures. And when it comes to a migrant, a long-distance migrant like Egyptian vulture, you're right. It'd be silly to, you know, just draw a minimum convex polygon around the whole of an Egyptian vulture's movements from the Balkans down to Niger or whatever. That would be silly. You know, you might be looking at 2 or 3 vulture safe zones for a single Egyptian vulture population. Like you said, one for the breeding site, which won't necessarily be that huge, but then you're going to have to deal with flyway scale issues, and then again a vulture safe zone around the population on the wintering grounds as well. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, John, and making that point about, you know, if you start, let's say you start with a breeding a safe zone around a breeding area, and then you want to build on that and making it contiguous and trying to figure out how do you start securing more and more space for these safe space for these brilliant creatures. So we have about 5 minutes left, just to note the time. So and then we'll be sort of returning to the main session. But before that, I see Mohammed has his hand up again. So Mohammed.
Thank you. Really, it was all of this input. It's really very important. We're going to start this safe zone for vulture in a new project that is coming next year. And that's why I would like to get some more information so we can be really in the right tracks for this, to build up that. I really would like to know also another issue, which is when we have a safe zone, I see example in Spain, they have a dealing with the farmers to put, example for the food, they put the food in one place. So it's kind of gathering the food. And now this is another issue, how we know that this is, not using other kind of, the medical diclofenac or even other kind of medicine that could affect them. So how they deal, I don't know if somebody is having this, because these issues we've been discussing lately to develop that zone. So it will be good if somebody has an experience to give us feedback in that, please. Thank you.
Anyone have experience? Maybe Jamshed, Chris? I mean, we have experience in Africa that we can share. Go ahead, Jamshed.
Well, thank you, Mohammed. Just to share with you that when we started monitoring vulture safe zones in 2012, at that time we found multiple factors like diclofenac and other harmful NSAIDs in that area, and also some local level issues like looping of trees and things. But since very start of that time, we started monitoring all the pharmacies in that vulture safe zone, that the designated 100 kilometer square radius area. So at that time we found that almost all NSAIDs like cyclophenate, ketoprofen, flunixin, they were available in the markets. So we started monitoring the pharmacies surveys, and those surveys were like we made a database of all those pharmacies, and then we started convincing those pharmacies as well about the harmful impacts of these NSAIDs. We educated those peoples, and then we also educated and create awareness among the farmers who were using these NSAIDs, and we also educated the veterinary practitioners in that area. We also had prepared a database of all veterinary practitioners. We also made aware about the harmful effects, and then gradually we found that in the recent surveys that at least in that radius area, those NSAIDs, the harmful NSAIDs, are almost now not being used in this area. So I think this is very practical approach, that if we start from a small area, and even now we are expanding this our advocacy services beyond that radius of vulture safe zone, and we are focusing on the other pharmacies and then at provincial level, etc. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. This has been a really interesting discussion, and I'm sure there's a lot of things whirring in everyone's minds. Unfortunately, we do have to wrap up and move to the next session, which starts immediately after this. So what I would suggest is that, please feel free to get in touch with any of us, through the system. I think we can direct message each other as well, and we can continue to share. But what's definitely come out of the session for me is that we seem to have a consensus that vulture safe zones could be very applicable to helping with the Egyptian vulture, you know, sort of the threats against the Egyptian vultures, and that there are some key sites already identified in terms of moving forward. So I apologize, John, we do have to move on. So thank you everyone for coming, and I see there are questions in the chat as well. So keep them going, and let's keep this conversation going. And if you need any information, you know, there's Milan, there's Jamshed, there's Chris, John, myself, Mary. We all have, you know, knowledge and ideas around this that we'd be happy to share and bounce off, and Stella as well. So thank you once again, everyone. Let's move on back to Events Air. So now we're back onto the other platform. See you guys over there.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yes,
Thank you.
nice to see you, Ivailo.
Thank you.
We often correspond. It's nice to see your face.
Thank you. Sure.
Yeah, great.
Goodbye.
Thank you. For me too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.